3, 2, 1.
Hit it.
What?
Reversal of fortune.
That's why I tell my friends everything happens for a
Seriously,
reason.
you had one job.
I can't with some of these people.
Christ.
Put down your goddamn cell
I don't
phone.
think my dad even knows how to use a computer.
Would
you rather?
All right, trust me. Take my
No, but
advice.
seriously, that legit happened.
How's it going, guys? And welcome to Nervous Habits. This week, I will be joined by addiction specialist, clinician, and medical director, Dr. Vera Tarman, to dive into all things addiction. We'll be addressing issues including why our addiction to food is the most pressing addiction that hardly anybody talks about, how exactly the fast food industry targets heavy users to perpetuate their addictions to processed food, why you can never really scare a person out of their addiction, how to program your brain into only craving healthy food, and finally, why calorie counting is not the answer and how you might end up dieting yourself into obesity. All that and so much more on another episode of
Nervous Habits.
What's going on, fam? Hope everyone is safe and healthy and happy. I'm really excited to chat about nutrition in this episode with you guys. Obviously, food and nutrition is something I've discussed quite a bit on the pod. The first episode, we talked about protein and macros and then fiber later on. And I did an episode on fast food and the omnipresence of corn in all of our food and Americans' inclination towards processed food, which my guest will be touching on quite a bit. And then, I've talked about GMOs, and I did a whole episode on vegan and vegetarianism and Americans' swelling appetite for meat. That's back episode 21. So my guest today, Dr. Vera Tarman, she is far more knowledgeable in all of this than I am. She's actually a food addiction specialist and clinician. Vera is the medical director of Renaissance, which is Canada's largest drug and alcohol residential treatment center, and the author of Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction, which is now in its second edition. If you feel like maybe you have an unhealthy addiction to sugar or fast food or greasy food, fried food, if you want to maybe reprogram your brain to crave healthy food, stay away from the sugar, the desserts, or maybe you want to cut back on the meat, or try to gain an understanding for what's going on in your brain that's leading you to seek out these foods. Definitely tune into this episode. Vera had a lot of amazing insights that I think we would all benefit from incorporating into our daily regimen. So without further ado, my conversation with Vera. Vera, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ricky. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here. You are a bona fide food addiction specialist, right?
That's right. I am. I'm actually an addiction specialist, a medical doctor that specializes in addiction, and I have my own interest clinical interest in food addiction.
When people hear addiction, Vera, they think drugs, they think alcohol.
Yeah.
I can't say before our conversation that I really ever gave a lot of thought to the idea that the foods that we eat every day could be as addictive as, say, a drug.
Yeah, I know. You kind of represent the general population, and it's actually not really until you try to quit that you see actually how addictive it is. But people don't think about quitting until they're gaining weight or they're sick, right?
Yeah, Vera, before we delve into specifics of, our addiction to sugar and refined sugars, I just sort of want to contextualize this conversation because right now we're obviously in the midst of this month, several months long pandemic.
Yeah.
And quite a few people are home, they're out of work, they're bored out of their minds, and they have nothing to do but pace around their kitchens and sort of indulge in food. And so I would imagine that in your work specifically helping people with food addictions right now is a time where you're seeing tremendous need where people who maybe have never experienced food addiction before are realizing maybe I have a problem in the context of the pandemic.
That's right, because they pick up baking. They've decided they're going to start cooking. They're getting family together to do like a baking for the kids or whatever. And yes, they're probably realizing by now people are starting to put on those pounds and are going, whoa, better stop. And now are discovering how difficult it is to stop. But there is the other side of it. one of the things that's really difficult about quitting sugar is the social nature of it. And we're socially isolating. So we actually have the opportunity to quit without having, family saying, hey, I baked you this cake, or it's Christmas, or it's a wedding, or whatever. We don't have those cues. We could actually stop. So there's two sides to that coin.
Right. That's an excellent counterpoint. I mean, you could say the same thing with alcohol about people who have had, substance problems with social drinking, because obviously it's difficult to, order club soda at a bar, and now they're at home. Maybe it's a nice opportunity to wean off alcohol consumption.
Yeah, that's right. So it is possible. There is another side to it. But, the other thing is when you asked the question about how can sugar or food be addictive. The other thing is that the nature of sugar addiction or food addiction, the different levels or variations of it, is it's not an addiction where you stop and you have cold turkey, shakes and sweats and you're on the toilet, vomiting like you might with an opiate or even alcohol addiction. It's a low grade, long, it's like not big in the face, but prolonged addiction. And so you don't even notice that you're irritable or anxious because you haven't had sugar or you're crashing from sugar. You just attribute it to your bipolar disorder or your attention deficit disorder or something like that. Like it's almost under the radar. And it's when you actually stop and those things get better or even go away that you go, oh my God, that was the food.
That's an amazing insight, and I think it sort of begs the question of how well or how poorly we understand our own bodies, because I agree with you. I think people will misattribute the source of their depression, their irritability, their anxiety. They'll think, oh, it's a circumstance, it's a relationship, maybe it's a hobby, maybe it is a psychological problem. But a lot of times, to your point, we have dependencies on things, not even food. I mean, dependencies on other things in our lives, and we're not good judges of what it is. And it's only once you take a step back and you say, wait a minute, that's my 13th Oreo this day, or wait a minute, I can't go, a couple days without a McDonald's burger, where you realize there is a dependency problem here, Vera.
Yeah, that's right. I like to actually think of it as it's almost like quitting sugar or quitting food is like at the same level of quitting cigarettes. You quit and it's not like this huge fall crash, but it's this constant you want that cigarette. I don't know if you were ever a smoker, but people say smoking is the hardest thing to quit because it's in your face. You do it so many times in a day. That's exactly how we eat sugar. It's kind of like a tobacco addiction.
I mean, it's funny, Vera. I have sort of I've been told that I have an addictive personality, and I am aware of that. So I stay away from video games because I know if I start a video game, it'll be an all-consuming force on my life. I also stay away from cigarettes because I understand. And I think a lot of this is about self-awareness. A lot of this is about, knowing what your tendencies are and adapting to them. I know that if I smoke a pack of cigarettes because I'm stressed out today, next week I'm going to smoke a pack of cigarettes. If I take a Xanax because I'm stressed out, then I'm going to develop that addiction.
Yes, you're right. You got it right on. Yeah.
And I think, obviously, we spoke before this, and I mentioned a lot of my background is in psychology and neuroscience. And I think that it's impossible to talk about food addiction in America without talking about the impact that, marketing campaigns and businesses have on our brain. So would you say, when you trace the root of sugar addiction in America, would you say that these big businesses and the advertising campaigns and that plays into it, or are there other factors as well?
Yeah, you're describing really nicely the sort of paradigm or platform of how you can understand addiction. Addiction in itself, it's a biological phenomenon. It's a dopamine impairment process that's literally happening, change in the brain type of thing. But then there's a sociological overlay, which is the whole what we call in the addiction field, the addiction tools, people, places, things, the cues, the associations, the Pavlov's dog bell. You hear the bell and you start to salivate. Well, you smell the Cinnabons or the croissants and you start to salivate. Smell is just a trigger, and the advertising industry has really, oh my God, put tons of money into that kind of subliminal, I guess it is, psychological dimension on top of the actual biological change. And the food industry is just really clever at, it's an industry, it's a profit industry, and they're doing it as well as the tobacco industry and as well as the alcohol industry.
And there's been a lot of literature, if you've read any of Michael Pollan's books, like The Eater's Manifesto, The Omnivore's Dilemma, where they actually pull back the Iron Curtain and they let you know what goes on at these companies. And essentially, they have focus groups. They invest millions of dollars bringing people in and testing dozens of smells. Because I think your point on the Q is very, if you walk into a McDonald's, they want you to smell that French fry, that indistinguishable odor, and immediately, prompt your salivary glands, like Pavlov's bell, to kick into gear. And so they invest so many resources into bringing in people to say A is better than B, B is better than C, and they make it so that it's almost impossible to resist that impulse to want, fast food, for example.
Yeah, you got it. You hit it right on the head. And that's why foods, the processed food industry, this conversation ultimately boils down to, why are we having this conversation, is to first of all recognize that there's a problem and it's causing problems like obesity and mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera. What do we do about it? Well, we stop eating processed foods, get away from the industry that's doing that. But they're beyond that even, there's clinicians like me, addiction doctors, who are left with the subculture of people who can't just stop anymore. It's bad for you. You tried to quit a million times, but you keep coming back to it. So now what? And that's where addiction doctors fit in, I think.
Yeah, and I think another part of this conversation is, relaying the fact that people are really how do I explain this? Is educating people about how there's no fault here. If anything, if there is fault, it's fault on the part of the businesses, because every single human being at our base impulses craves sugar and craves fat. That's just the way that our bodies are constructed. So, yes. It's not like you're a bad person because you smell bacon, grilling and you want meat, or, you smell the McDonald's French fries and you want a burger and fries. These companies are essentially exploiting our physiological impulses and inclinations. And, if anything, we're just sort of like victims. We're sort of helpless in this scheme. It's not like, we're to blame for being addicted to these foods.
Yeah, I agree. In the language of addiction, they are the pushers, and like pushers, what they do is they make something extremely available and very cheap and capture a large swath of the population. And, in that industry, they've got terms like the heavy users. They don't call them the addicts, but that's what they are. They're the people who don't just have a few Oreos, but they get the 2 or 3 things from those Girl Guide, that knock on your door. I'll take a few boxes, thank you. And you wolf those down in the night. Not everybody does that, but there's a bunch of those people, and it's not their fault. This is I like that word, exploit. It's exactly what it is.
So we're going to kind of pivot away from fast food in a moment, but this is a really interesting conversation, and it's something that I've actually spoken about on the podcast before, because if you break down the composition of a fast food meal, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this at some point with processed foods, but pretty much like 95% of it ends up being just corn, right? The corn, the high fructose corn syrup that goes into the soda, or the corn oil that grills the French fries, or the corn-fed cows that produce the burger. And if you look further in terms of how real and organic this food is, there's studies. There was something that came out a couple of years ago where someone actually left a Big Mac in their desk drawer for 10 years. Yeah. 10 years, Vera. Did you hear about this?
Something like this. It wasn't the burger, but something like that. Yeah.
They left a burger in their drawer for 10 years, and they accidentally found it. I don't know how that transpired, and the burger looked exactly the same as when this guy brought it. So it also, from a health perspective, it shows that this food might not be that good. Really, it might be pretty detrimental for our bodies to be consuming this.
Yeah. Well, really, yeah. So I guess our food is either pre-digested for us or indigestible, Yeah, it's, yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
So our listeners are probably gonna be really craving, a nice fast food quarter pounder right now. But for those people listening who maybe are skeptical, Vera, who might say, what's wrong with sugar? If I put 3 sugars in my coffee, or, I put a little sugar, I'm making a cake or what have you. Is sugar really all that dangerous compared to, the other things we could be putting our bodies, like, vegetable oil or, bacon fat or grease? What makes sugar in particular so harmful?
I don't know if that's, there's two things in your question there. One is you can pit a bad. It's almost like saying what's wrong with alcohol when cocaine is worse. Well, they're both a problem. Or, what's wrong with marijuana? It's not as bad as alcohol. They can both be a problem for a vulnerable person. So let's just crash that discussion right there. Bacon fat versus sugar. They can both be a problem. But sugar particularly, the other thing is, and this is where people are so incredulous, like, how can it be a problem? We've normalized sugar in the very same way that when I was a young intern, 20 years ago, I think it was only 20 years ago, that I was sitting in a respiratory oncologist's office. So that's a guy that deals with lung cancer, and he's puffing away at his cigarette in the office because it was normal to smoke cigarettes. It was normal to smoke a cigarette in an airplane, and it's normal to eat a Snickers bar when you're in the middle of having a conversation or at a meeting. Like, we've normalized this so that we ask that question with the toxin in our hand. What's wrong with this? Well, I'll tell you what's wrong with it. When we talk about sugar, you can say, what about fruits? What about vegetables like corn, like beets that have sugar in them? If we eat them in the actual package that nature has given it to us, in other words, unrefined and non-processed, actually there's nothing wrong with it. You can have as much fruit as you like, as your body can stand in that day. It's when you take it and you refine it and you process it, that's when it becomes a problem. And when we ask that question, how can it be bad? It's not making that distinction. Having cocaine in the coca leaf that it grows in South America when you're traveling, high up in the mountains, it's not addictive, not like the stuff that you buy around the corner from some. And so it's really apples and oranges, if I can use that phrase there.
Well, yeah. It's interesting. I think you're actually striking on something, something that's also insightful as a side note, is just the fact that when we get food from its original source compared to like taking it in supplemental form, it's better. It's like the old saying, it's better to just eat an orange to get the vitamin C than take a vitamin C pill. We should be going directly to the foods, Vera.
Yes. Like the phrase goes, I don't know if that was Michael Pollan who said it, but somebody, eat real foods and not too many of them. That sounds like Michael Pollan. That's it exactly. That, we could summarize the importance of this conversation just simply by that. If we ate real foods, we wouldn't have all these problems. And we don't, and we've got a ton of problems.
Absolutely. No, I think that's particularly well said. And you mentioned in some of the work that you've done, you talk about how sugar is a gateway drug for teenagers. So right. What do you mean by a gateway drug, and then why are teenagers in particular at risk?
Yeah, okay. So actually, we can even push the envelope a bit further and say kids, because again, if we're eating real food, and that's either mother's milk or that's real food, you start with the vegetables and fruits that mom is trying to give you when you're a kid. That's not a problem. That stuff is not a problem. I mean, mother's milk is high in fat and sweet, not a problem. But, we start giving kids, Cheerios and fruit juice and those boxed juices and whatever. And if we see that as toxic chemical, not food, toxic food product, not food, then we can actually start to see that what's happening is we're bombarding a system that's built for real food. We're bombarding a system, crushing it, destroying the receptors in such a way that when another drug, like it makes the same argument as cigarettes can be a gateway, marijuana can be a gateway for harder drugs, sugar can be a gateway, because you've bombarded the system that might have been robust enough that you could have had a little and not succumb to the addiction. But there you are, you're already half beaten by sugar. And then by the time you're a teenagers, I mean, you study psychology, that this is an age where a lot of risk and impulsive behavior is intended to happen so that you learn to moderate that behavior. It's part of the challenge of being a teenager. When you've got a bombarded system that can no longer give the appropriate cues, first of all, you're not going to do a lot of appropriate learning, and you're a sitting duck. for stuff that comes around your way, like alcohol or that first hit of cocaine or whatever it is. Or the Ritalin that your doctor is giving you because of your ADHD, that might not have been a problem. But if your system's not that robust, this is the problem.
Absolutely. And you said early on in that response, you talked about how we need to be regarding some of these products as food products and not food.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever picked up a box of Entenmann's donuts. Do you know the ones I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. Oh my God, or Entenmann loaf bread. I used to
eat
that stuff. Oh my God. Yeah.
Can you visualize for me what a box of 8 rich frosted Entenmann's donuts looks like?
Yeah.
So Entenmann's donuts, and I'm about to ruin. I do this on the podcast sometimes, Vera. I had an episode I talked about Coca-Cola, and a lot of my listeners, I had written in, and they were like, now I can't drink Coke anymore. Entenmann's donuts actually contains 100 ingredients. 100 ingredients in there, none of which are food. I mean, I'll read off a couple to you. It's let's see what we got here. And you can go to gardengrocer.com. They provide ingredients lists, but it contains cellulose gum, guar gum, tapioca dextrin, xanthan gum, caria gum, blue carotene, sodium aluminum phosphate, calcium carbonate, pre-gelatinized wheat starch, reduced iron. I mean, it's a hydrogenated palm kernel oil, high fructose corn syrup, of course. So if you really, I remember one time I was on a diet, only eating fruits and vegetables and meat, and I went over to a box of donuts, Entenmann's donuts. I smelled it, I took a bite, and it tasted like paint thinner.
Wow.
So I wonder if, Vera, if it's a normal reaction for people that go off processed foods for a while and then come back, that they realize that this actually isn't food after all.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. For any of your listeners, if you've ever been a smoker, you quit smoking and then you decide to have a smoke, and it's that horrible taste. It's like, holy God. But the sad thing about it is 3 or 4 cigarettes into the package, you don't notice that anymore. And similarly with the Entenmann's. But you're right. It's those of us who don't eat this stuff anymore, like me, I don't eat that stuff anymore. Whenever I've had it by accident or something like that, it's like, holy cow. Can't believe that people eat that stuff. Which is actually good news, because it does show that we habituate back to eating proper foods. For so many people, when they think, this is all very well and good, but there's no way I can stop eating my Entenmann's. The good news is you actually can, and you won't want them. It's just you got to get through that period of time.
It just reminds me, have you ever seen The Matrix?
No, but I've heard about it.
You haven't seen The Matrix?
I have not seen I keep thinking I should see it. But,
oh my God! Please see it. I mean, it's been over 20 years.
Yeah.
The hallmark of American cinema. But the only reason why I bring it up is because essentially it just reminds me of the concept of the Matrix.
Yeah, I do. Tons.
We're living in a simulation, and it's only when you take the red pill, so to speak, that you realize that everything around you is an illusion. And most people opt to take the blue pill, to go for ignorance, and it just feels that way with the foods like the Entenmann's or any processed foods or fast foods, anything you buy in a supermarket, that people just kind of say, like fuck it, I'm just gonna consume this food, and I know it's bad for me. I know that I know that after the third bite it won't take, just because they want to live in that ignorance.
Yeah. I believe that. I believe that because don't forget, I'm an addictions doctor, and I see that all the time. People are smoking pot and they're thinking, hey, this is not a problem at all, not recognizing that if it's a daily thing, there is something that's actually happening, but they don't want to know. Like it's there in all sorts of other ways, not just food, but food is a big one. That's why we can say it's a drug.
And it also comes back to psychology, and you see this with cigarette smokers. If you survey 100 cigarette smokers, 90% of them will agree that cigarettes cause cancer, but the same 90% will say, "Oh, I smoke anyway." So how do you reconcile that?
Well, I think it's that thing. One of the features of addiction, like there's different features that you have to sort of qualify to be said that you have an addiction, and one of them is denial. We have the brain has a great capacity. It's like a cognitive bias almost to diminish fearful thoughts, to diminish fears. So what people will say is, okay, I agree, it's a problem. But today, one more day is really not going to make much difference. I mean, literally, I've had a guy sitting on my examining table, and he's got a foot that's going to have to be amputated because of his alcoholism. So there's peripheral neuropathy and all sorts of basically problems. He's a smoker and he's an eater, and he's got to get his foot amputated sometime. He's already on the list for that surgery, and he's still smoking, he's still eating, he's still drinking because he says, "What's one more day?" So we have an ability to diminish. Maybe just so that we can cope with life. I don't know. And it doesn't work in our favor in this case. We'll actually say in this the addiction world, you can't scare a person straight. You can't scare them. You can scare them, but they won't get clean. You have to make them want to be clean by offering a positive view. A negative view will scare people actually into using more.
And Vera, that's incredibly disheartening and troubling that there are people coping with these problems. How often do you hear people say, "We're all going to die anyway"?
You mean like today because of all the things that are going on today? I mean, I feel so sorry for people.
Well,
Yeah.
not even today. I just mean,
In general.
pre-COVID, if someone has a smoking problem or eating problem and you say like, "Oh, you probably should, not eat that Big Mac." How often is the response, "Well, we're all going to die anyway, so it doesn't matter"?
Yeah, I mean, that is the response. And part of it is understandable. Again, it's not the person's fault. It's understandable in the context of, what part of the brain is talking. If I say to you, and you're used to having that bottle of wine at night or the tub of Haagen-Dazs at night, or the Entenmann's at night, you can't have any tonight. Your immediate, maybe not you, but a person's immediate reaction who lives on that stuff and relies on it to get through the night, to get to sleep, is going to be distress, which is in the limbic part of the brain. It's the panic button. The amygdala gets charged up. It's an immediate response to, I got to save my life because you're threatening my life on some level. And the long-term picture is part of the frontal lobe. It's part of another part of the brain which is not activated when you're in a stress response. You want to deal with the upcoming train that's coming at you right now, which is to pick up your food. And the concept of the long-term pain is secondary because you got to save your life in this moment. And what I have to do as an addiction clinician, or the counselor, the food coach, the sponsor, whoever it is to essentially hold that person's hand, keep them stable and steady until the train actually passes them, because it doesn't really hit you just think it will. And you have to live through that. It's what we call post-acute withdrawal, until everything kind of recalibrates back and the Entenmann's is no longer your lifesaver. But you're asking a person, it's almost like you're in a panic attack telling the person, don't be afraid. They're going to, and you just have to sit through that 20 minutes and help them not pick up while that 20 minutes, settles down. Yeah.
The more you describe this, the easier I think it is for me and probably the folks listening to imagine food as an addiction, because it seems like people will eat as a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Much like, if you think about how drug addictions start, and obviously this is your field of expertise, someone is extremely distressed, someone is going through, a death, a tragedy, a breakup, and they, have a hit of something to make the pain go away. And then over time, they begin to make that association. I get relief when I inject or when I consume or when I sniff, whatever this is.
Yes, and it doesn't even have to be a big distress. It can just be a chronic boredom, a subacute depression. You have a substance that relieves you of that constant gnawing of whatever it is. It's like a post-traumatic stress, but on a smaller level, but repetitive over and over and over. And you're just constantly reinforcing that Pavlovian response of, oh, this feels better, until it becomes a survival mechanism. It's not even just coping, it's actual survival. And now here you are trying to quit. It's very hard to quit.
Absolutely. So I love the conversation about psychology. I feel like we could talk about this all day. I want to go back to sugar for a moment, because folks out there listening might be buying what you're saying about, okay, maybe I should cut back on sugar. But does that mean that we have to stop eating sugar forever? Is this like just a temporary change that we would need to make, Vera?
Well, I want to ask again the question that's, again, it's sort of normalizing the concept of, do I have to quit smoking forever, or can I just have a cigarette here and there? Why would you want to? That means that you're still you're still caught by the allure that the sugar, cigarette, whatever it is going to have some value other than destruction. So
Yeah.
I just want to nab that one right in the right there as I see it. But if you are somebody who says, I want to moderate because I really do want to have, on my wedding day, a piece of birthday cake or wedding cake or whatever, if you're somebody who has a fairly robust system, it's almost like, think about it like a person who's diabetic becomes diabetic because of an onslaught of sugar over the years, and biological vulnerability for sure, and so their insulin receptors become beaten down in such a way that they can no longer put sugar into their cells, and that's what type 2 diabetes eventually becomes, is sugar that stays in the blood because you can't bring it into the cells, because the cells are essentially no longer efficient and able to bring them in. So all sorts of things happen as a result of that. Think about that process happening in the brain, but instead of it being the insulin receptors, we're talking about the dopamine receptors. You get this onslaught of dopamine, aka a ton of sugar or cocaine or something else, and the receptors become more and more fragile, less and less robust, and eventually you stop. The diabetic, when they stop, they're still a diabetic. They may be functionally okay because they're eating well, but if the moment they start eating crap again, their sugars go from normal of 2 to 7 up to 15 to 20 to 30 to 60, which is, I think you guys use different frames than we do, but units than we do, but nevertheless, way above normal, even though they are functionally okay when they eat well. Similarly with the addict, if you've reached a point where your receptors are battened down, like beaten down, you're able to function if you're not using anymore. But the moment you start using, you can't. Like you're back. Your dopamine impairment. Addiction could be called dopamine impairment syndrome, as far as I'm concerned. So the impairment comes right back, and so that's a person who cannot ever pick up sugar again. Although we would never say that. We would say, for today you don't have to pick it up.
Right. It's so interesting that all of this comes back to dopamine levels and the dopamine cycle. I mean, like you said, addiction could be renamed. Was it dopamine
impairment syndrome or dopamine receptor impairment syndrome? Yeah. I mean, it's more than dopamine, but dopamine is a thing that addiction doctors mainly focus on, the dopamine 2 receptors and the impairment, which happens across the board with any drug, alcohol, cocaine, crack, sugar. We see it in obesity. Why? Probably because that person's obese because of the foods that they were eating, not intentionally, but because they were vulnerable to the food industry. Yeah.
Yeah. Vera, I want to confide something in you, and I hope this is a safe space, and judgment-free zone.
Yep.
So when I was a kid and into my teenage years, I drank a lot of coffee, and when I drink coffee, I'm one of those people that you go into a cafe and they have the sugar packets and then they have the big container of sugar that you pour in.
Oh my God, yeah.
I'm one of those. Now this is not going to be good. I'm one of those people that I actually, when I was younger, up until a couple of years ago, I would take the lid off of the sugar and pour it in.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'm talking about probably, and people have seen me at work. People would come up to me and just watch me. I'm talking probably anywhere from like maybe 7 or 8 to like 10 to 12, servings of sugar in my coffee, which I did for a long time. Yeah. Otherwise I'm healthy. I don't eat dessert. My diet's pretty balanced, but definitely a lot of sugar in the coffee. And now what I do is, do you know those creamers that they put in coffee, the flavored creamers?
Yep.
That's my one vice, Vera. That's the only thing I'm not a crazy drinker and I don't smoke. That's the only thing I indulge in. So would you say that, obviously I know that's, if you look at the back, that's mostly high fructose corn syrup and all these different artificial flavors, but
you haven't told me how many you put in a coffee.
I just kind of pour in maybe like a 1/6 of a cup, a 1/5 of a cup.
Oh, okay.
So for people out there that indulge in those creamers, is that like a big problem, or is that sort of like in moderation that's not that bad?
It's probably if it's within the context of that's all you're doing, it's probably fine, and you're young enough that you were probably robust enough that you can handle that. But Ricky, I'm gonna just make this suggestion to you. You're a guy who's you've taken on a study that's quite challenging. You're doing a podcast, which is a lot of work, and it's pretty daring to do, like in terms of putting yourself out there. And those just those two things. I don't know anything else about you. Suggest that you're somebody that already thrives on excitement and risk taking and daring, which is all dopamine. And my guess is that you're not sitting on the couch doing nothing. You're doing this kind of stuff, and so some of this is spilling over, I'd say, almost into appropriate behavior. Like it's life. You're living on life's terms. You're taking on life's challenges. But if you were one of those people that was sitting on watching Netflix on the couch, you'd probably, because of those creamers and because of that sugar intake of years ago, would be downing the Entenmann's or whatever, or more than the next person. And in a way, you've adapted a recovery technique intuitively that most people wouldn't do. Like, I really think that addicts, if I can say, this is just hypothetical, right? Because I don't know you.
Yeah.
That you are probably at risk for developing an addiction because of that history and maybe other stuff. But you've somehow intuitively moved your desires into a like functional way that's working for you, that not everybody will do. Because addicts, I think, are the people who were the pioneers. They were the Steve Jobs. They were the people who did the crazy, outlandish stuff and then won, some of them. The person who's not willing to take on that challenge is the one that's sitting on the couch, just, the bystander. And they're less likely to become addicts, or maybe in a different way. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying keep doing what you're doing, and you can probably have your creamers. But if you stop doing what you're doing, watch the creamers.
Wow. I mean, well, thanks so much for the unexpected consult. You can send me a bill in the mail for that.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I mean, to be honest with you, if I have an addiction to anything, I would think it's caffeine. Is that something that you see a lot with your clients?
Well, yes, I do. Usually in attendance with other stuff, because people don't usually come to see me because of their caffeine addiction. But what I do see is that people, similarly, they don't. Well, now they'll come to see me because of sugar. But in the past, it wouldn't have been. But it would have been. What happened is they put down their other substance, and then the caffeine intake just skyrocketed, and then the sugar intake skyrocketed because they had to find it somewhere. And those are more acceptable social addictions. We also see sex addiction and gambling addiction, process addictions too, which now, and you actually mentioned earlier video. I bet you're getting some of your stuff out with the videos. And I don't know if you ever noticed that you struggle with that, but there are many people who have found themselves caught in that,
Right. Well, I mentioned video games, like,
yes.
Like, oh, is that what you meant?
Yes. That's another industry that's spending a lot of time trying to snag heavy users.
Yeah, I mean, there are clinics right now that I'm sure you're aware of where people check themselves in for video game addiction, where essentially there's a lot of good research on this now, where people will go online on something called Twitch, and they'll play games for the public, and they'll stay in their room for 48 hours straight. They won't leave to go to the bathroom. They'll pee in a jar, and they'll have food delivered to them.
Wow. I mean, I actually have not seen somebody myself, like treated somebody, but I hear about that a lot, and I just find it astounding. Just astounding.
I mean, the last thing I'll say on the caffeine addiction is I do think, you mentioned that it's normalized in society and it's sort of an across the board problem. I do think that we've devoted a lot of time to talking about food addiction and how people should look in the mirror and say, maybe I have an unhealthy dependency on fast food, on corn, on sugar. I think you could say the same thing about caffeine, because for me, again, sort of like airing out my dirty laundry for you, I drink at least 3 or 4 cups a day. I mean, I'm talking about a big cup in the morning, 2 cups in the afternoon, a cup in the evening, to the point where my tolerance for caffeine is so high, Vera, I don't even feel the coffee take impact until the 3rd or 4th cup. That's a serious problem.
Yeah, well, yes, I guess it is. Yeah. I mean, depending on your, blood pressure status and, level of insomnia, anxiety, all those sorts of things. Yeah, for sure it can be.
I would say, I'm a high functioning addict in the sense of like I don't necessarily have any sort of those byproducts, but I do think it's important if people are listening and
Yeah.
they do consume a lot of caffeine to realize that maybe maybe sort of like re-examine your relationship there.
Yep. I think that's a good idea. Yeah. And then if you do re-examine your relationship, watch out that it doesn't morph into something else like candy.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, are you a big coffee drinker yourself?
I am a big coffee drinker. When you talk about that, I'm thinking about my allegiance to Starbucks. I've got the mobile app where I pick it up on the way and stuff like that.
Oh man, so I do want to also make sure to get to pick your brain on dieting, because I know this all like blends together very nicely. But let's say that, Vera, there's someone listening who has made the decision to cut out processed foods, and they're interested in exploring one of the menu of diets available. What information would be relevant for you to know in order to steer them towards one diet or the other?
Yeah. Okay. So, today, diets used to mean restricting your intake so that you exercise a lot, like go to the gym. I got to get my membership at the gym and start going every day. You don't need to do that at all. But if you want to, go ahead. Or it meant I just got to restrict and starve, be hungry all the time, or large portions of the day. And I would say that, first of all, there are a number of food plans out there now which don't require that, and I'm very happy about those. So the number one cardinal rule is, if you want to stop eating processed food. Number one, that's the number one thing. And if processed drinks, especially like pops, soda pop, that sort of thing, that you'll do a big favor if you stop that, and juices. Okay, so once you've done that, the second thing, whatever food plan you do, don't starve yourself. Do not be hungry. And this isn't intermittent fasting. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about in general. You want to be full. It's just you want to be full with the appropriate foods. So that's item number 2. And then the third thing is, there are a few food plans that I think are not bad. Euphemistically, we call them in the community, if you look it up, paleo or hunting caveman diet or hunting gathering diet. I think paleo is the main word, where it's a focus on low carb, but moderate and moderate fat. And the magic of that diet is the low carb piece, because if you're going to eat carbs, you're going to eat vegetables, because in order to keep your plate full, you're not going to have, a little sprig of Entenmann cake. That's not worth it. You'd rather have a big plate of cauliflower or something. So you want to go for the complex carbs, because you're going low carb, so you can't have that much energy dense, if I'm making sense here. So absolutely. So the paleo is a good plan. If you really want to, get going quickly, the keto food plan is very popular right now, and inadvertently they stumbled on a food addiction plan, not because they meant to, and because of that they can also end up getting into trouble. But that diet is high fat, relatively high protein, and very low carb, like almost in some cases no carb or extremely low carb. Again, the magic of that is the carb piece. Because if you're going to have any carbs at all, it's not going to be the refined ones, which will drive up your numbers too high. And so right away, you're eating a food plan that's not addictive, because fats are addictive in the context of sugar, refined sugar. But in and of themselves, not the case. Nobody eats a tub of bacon grease or a tub of butter alone. Just that happens very seldom. But if you put sugar in it, now you've got something that is very, that's ice cream. That's it's crispy stuff on chicken wings. It ends up being very addictive. So those food plans work well, just inadvertently, because of the lower carb piece. So that's what I'd look for. But you don't have to go to that extent. It's just the value of them is that there's so many, and as long as they cut out the refined carbs, you get all sorts of food ideas and menus and recipes. If you don't know what to do, somebody will tell you what to do.
Right. I think it's interesting, because a lot of this boils boils down to this all or nothing mentality we have in American culture. I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but it's the idea that like either you starve yourself for a month and you lose weight, or it's not worth dieting at all.
Right. Yeah. And that doesn't work because what's the point? I heard somebody say this the other day, and it's so good. So you lose weight, but if you're going to gain it back, what the hell was what was it worth? You've lost that weight for the month. Right. And one of the things that happens, we see this with people who are obese. Often they'll say, I basically dieted myself into obesity, because every time you lose weight, you gain more the next time you gain the weight back. And if you're doing a starvation thing, you can't do that all your life. So you're going to gain the weight, like guaranteed you're going to gain the weight back.
Yeah.
And if you're not paying attention to the addictive nature of foods, it's not your fault. You're going to eat the crap because it's luring you like a bull being lured by the ring on its nose to eating. It doesn't want to go there, but it has to go there because it's addictive.
I think another thing that's important to highlight, and you noted something earlier, you said it, you shouldn't have to go to starve yourself, go to bed hungry to lose weight. Another thing here that a mistake people make, and tell me if this is correct, not all calories are created equal.
Exactly.
Because
Thank you.
Yeah. I think a lot of people in America and across the board think that just by counting, if I'm in a calorie deficit, I'll lose weight. But why isn't that correct?
Because it depends. So here now we actually get into the science, or the the nutritional science of the actual calories and what you're eating. So if you're eating refined foods, refined sugars specifically, carbohydrates, refined, you're eating foods that are quickly metabolized into sugar, and so the insulin increases, because the job of insulin is to mop away the sugar and carry it to the cells. And when you have high insulin levels, which is essentially the beginning of diabetes, it predisposes you to retaining fat. It predisposes you to retaining fat of the kind that is dangerous, what we call visceral fat, belly fat, otherwise known as wheat belly or beer belly or bread belly. It's the fat that sits around the waist, and that's what comes first. That stuff is very, very toxic, and very quick. You gain that weight very quickly when you eat this stuff. So you can eat the same amount of calories in complex carbs like Brussels sprouts and vegetables basically, and the insulin will not get spiked to make this happen. In fact, if you do gain weight, it'll be what we call subcutaneous fat, which is the good stuff, the stuff around your butt and your arms and your legs and your muscles. Not your muscles, but anyway, the good kind of fat that's not going to cause all sorts of disease, if at all. The calories, if they bring on insulin, this is where the problem is. And it's the beginning of the whole diabetic epidemic that we have today. Thanks to, like you mentioned earlier, the high fructose corn syrup and all those refined sugars. It's driving our system. It's driving our health costs up outrageously.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned bread belly. I'm not sure I've ever heard that expression, but just to like sort of contextualize what Vera just said, if you're hungry and you only want to eat 100 calories, eating healthy is going to essentially carry that 100 calories way farther than eating poorly, because you guys might have seen the visual, but like with 200 calories, you can eat an entire plate of broccoli. We're talking like, 50 pieces of baby broccoli, or you can eat a quarter of a slice of chocolate cake. You can eat, for 100 calories, you can eat an apple, or you can eat, a couple of gummy bears. Yeah. So when you choose to eat healthy, you're actually making yourself more full because it's more efficient. Fewer calories will take you farther than if you eat unhealthy.
Exactly. And not only will you be more full at the time, but you'll be more full over time. You're not going to be starving in 3 minutes or 5 minutes, or typically in an hour, you want another muffin or something. So you end up eating less. That's why, especially early on, you don't have to count calories. You don't have to worry about that stuff because your body will regulate. We were built to eat normal food, not this crap. And so our timing and how much we eat will actually, it'll take care of itself. Now, if you're already addicted and you're damaged, you may have to apply extra tools on top of that. But for the most part, yeah, you don't.
Absolutely. And it's like it's difficult to eat a lot of calories when you're eating healthy.
Yeah.
Like if you go to a restaurant, and let's say you order a cheeseburger and fries, or you order chicken tacos, smothered in cheese or whatever, and then you look and you see it's 1,200 calories. That same 1,200 calories, which, is maybe a couple bites of chicken, a couple bites of beef, that way, if you had to replicate that 1,200 calories by eating whole wheat or by eating fruits and vegetables, you would have to go through a lot of kale. I mean, a lot of asparagus, a lot of banana. So to Vera's point, you're really going to be full in the long run if you're actually efficient with those calories and eating real food as opposed to the processed garbage.
Yeah. So let me give you an example of exactly what you said. One guy that I knew who eats well now, but used to eat all the stuff that's super addictive, like the chicken wing. And it doesn't have to be sugar necessarily. It's chicken wings and burgers and pizzas and stuff like that. So he estimated that he probably ate about 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day, and was still hungry and had to have top up nightly snacks and whatnot. Now he eats to the fullest. So he's eating those baby Brussels and baby sprouts or whatever it is. And now he eats probably about between 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day. He is full. But you can see the difference. And he's not having to get up in the middle of the night and eat more. It really does work. And just on that level, the quality of the calories is, like you said, much more efficient.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, it's good to hear when some of these stories actually have a happy ending. I mean, what's interesting, and I'm just thinking out loud here, is I'm wondering if there was a way, and again, I'm just spitballing, if there was a way to sort of program your brain to only crave healthy foods. Because you mentioned before all about the Pavlovian science, how when we talked about with McDonald's, you step into the restaurant, you crave the fries, and you end up making a purchase. What if you could do, I don't know how this would work, but you can somehow, using a bell or a clicker, program yourself to only want healthy foods.
Okay.
And so that way, by the end of it, the food you were eating, the food that you were craving, the food that actually made your salivary glands initiate, and the thing that made your stomach growl was the smell of fresh roasted garlic or asparagus or fruit salad, as opposed to I just wonder if that's possible and what that might look like.
Ricky, it is possible that you don't even have to do anything. You just have to subtract. Our body, our brain can go back. It's the same way as a person can live without alcohol, who's an alcoholic, and live a normal, happy life. You don't have to use that ton of sugar that you had when you were younger. It's what happens is, if you get rid of that offender, that hijacker, that exploiter, what happens is this is the good news about this whole thing, and this is what people, please believe me, you just give it a chance and try. This is the message I try to give my patients, is you're going to sweat it out for about a month, and things will recalibrate back to the way we were built to like roasted garlic. Like, you don't have to do anything. That program is already there. It's just been exploited and hijacked. Get rid of the hijacker, unearth that program, and support that program.
Beautifully put. And I think a nice area where you see this is into intermittent fasting. I had a coworker who essentially he was on some sort of I don't know if it was a 16/8 plan or if it was like a 24-hour fasting thing, but what he told me, which was interesting, he told me that he would essentially not eat for 16, 18 hours. Then the first thing that he ate when he was finished was chickpeas. He would eat cans and cans of chickpeas, and he told me by the end of it, he did this for about a month. He loved chickpeas, and he loved lentils, and he loved beans, and he just didn't really like processed food all that much. So I wonder if you could use intermittent fasting as a way of reprogramming your brain in this way.
Well, that's a pretty extreme measure, and you can do that. I actually am a little nervous to suggest that, because a lot of times people, by the time they see me, have been on multiple starvation diets, and it'll just trigger their binge behavior. So I would be nervous about that as a general tool. I think intermittent fasting can be done, but it's got to be done carefully with somebody like a clinician to help. But the principle that you're talking about is absolutely right. When you subtract, you recalibrate. That guy loved because he was hungry, and you get back to appropriate hunger. What is it? Hunger is the best chef. You start to love food that you would have walked away from because you've gotten rid of the hijacker, just like he did, and you can reclaim that program that's been sitting there. That actually we love vegetables and fruits. It's just that we've forgotten, or we've been snowed by the foods that the super dense processed foods.
Absolutely. I mean, I think people forget just how delicious,
Yes.
I don't know about you. I love pineapple. Do you like pineapple?
Not so much, but I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
I don't know how you don't like. Well, so I think that there's few things in the world that are more satisfying to my taste buds than having some fresh cut pineapple and just lights up my dopamine receptors. And
I love blueberries, but I know what you mean.
Oh, yeah. Blueberries are delicious and loaded with antioxidants.
Yeah.
But there's few things that, and I think people, I don't even know if people forget that, but I think people are just so easily manipulated by the fats and by the processed foods. When and part of it, you mentioned cost in a different context. We were talking about healthcare. Part of it is the cost of industry, about how your money will go a lot farther buying, processed foods than buying fresh produce.
Yes, they will. But there's other costs that we don't acknowledge. So you're if you eat well, you're not paying medication costs. You're not paying costs to deal with the depression that you have as a result. All of the pain that you have, the physical pain, the self-loathe, like it depends on where you're willing to pay your cost. I think I personally rather pay good for my food. I'm not on any medication. I don't have a problem walking. I don't have a problem. You get what I'm saying here?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So I want to go back to intermittent fasting for a moment. Okay. You mentioned that under the guidance of a clinician, yes, it might be helpful. So is there, I know there's alternate day fasting, there's spontaneous meal skipping, and there's the 16-8 method. Is there one that you think is most efficacious across the board?
I think I would, because I am really nervous. Don't forget, I see people that at end stage where they're really beaten down, and like I said, they have long histories of starving. I'd probably go with the 16-8 and not get too hungry. I know there are real people, if you actually have diabetes and you need to have something that's more extreme, fine. But I don't know how many people, here it is. Are you doing it because you're physically unwell, like diabetes, and you have to sort of take care of that, or are you doing it because of weight loss? And if it's that reason, I would go with the 16-8, but still don't do it alone.
Well, I mean, there are certain people that have all sorts of restrictions, for example, religious restrictions, where during the month of Ramadan, observant Muslims can only consume food after a sunset, I believe. So that would be almost like a 16-8 plan on its own. Yeah,
as long as when they eat their food, at the time when they're allowed to, that it's not highly processed and it's not actually binges. Because I've heard of people who have disclosed to me, I didn't eat for 12 hours or however long it is, but then I really binged on all sorts of stuff. That is not a solution, and I don't think a proper intermittent fasting would a person doing that would say that that's a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think that's well said. Do you see binge eating a lot? And if so,
absolutely.
Is it? Yeah.
Binge eating because of people restricting. So that restricting binge, you have to be very careful with that. And that it's for that reason that I'm nervous about intermittent fasting, especially doing it alone. I think I'm gonna go on the line here and say I think it's actually should be a medical intervention. It should not be used for weight loss and whatnot. You don't need to do that if you eat proper food. Because a lot of time people think, okay, I won't eat for the 16 hours, and then in that 8-hour window, I can eat whatever I want. Not a good solution. No. But if you eat unprocessed food, you don't need to do that. You can eat 3 meals a day. And lose weight and feel fabulous and not be hungry. Like, Yeah.
So much of this is the fetishization of diets and fetishization by the media of like the plan of the week. You see these celebrities go on Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, Oprah, and they say, "Oh, I tried intermittent fasting, and look at me."
Yeah, but let's look at them in 5 years from now. Now, if I can just say, I can give you more than a handful, lots of people who have lost weight, and 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years later, they've still kept that weight off. And they're the people who are following basically an unrefined food plan. I mean, it might have started with a raw food diet or something. I don't really care, as long as it's not processed food. And they continue to lose weight. But we don't see them. They're not asked to go on Oprah because it's not exciting.
Yeah.
I wish Oprah or somebody would ask me to speak, but I don't have a very exciting message.
Well, we'll see. No, I mean, we'll see what happens depending on who this gets broadcast out to. Maybe Vera can speak some of her gospel. I mean, I really want to emphasize that I think a lot of this comes back to our culture of consumption, and that's something that I've spoken about on the podcast back episode. I think it was 27 or so, about how, as Westerners, Americans, Canadians, Europeans, we just want to consume everything we can, from food to sex to information.
Yeah.
And I think that in all of those contexts, you see the fodder for addiction.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, it's the dopamine itch. Dopamine is that I want. That's, if I say to you, you have a dopamine spike, you say, well, what do you mean? What does that feel like? Anytime you want something, that's dopamine. And so you want something big, that's a big dopamine rush.
And I wonder, as a cure to that, to scratch that itch, I said on the Culture of Consumption episode that because we consume so much media, Vera, that you should start writing, you should start creating, you should start producing instead of just consuming what other people make. So I wonder if in the food context, for example, people could start like cooking or preparing their own food, if that might help at all. Yes, but you can move outside of food. I mean, food is just one of a number of things that dopamine is attached to. Like you're doing your thing with the podcast and whatnot, and people can get out there and start being creative in their whatever skill that they have. Like I really, when I have somebody coming to see me with their addiction problems, when they have some other passion that they want to engage in, I immediately have a sigh of relief, because I think, okay, this is where they can start putting all that dopamine itch to their benefit. But if they don't have that, it doesn't have to stay with food. It can be in something else, Absolutely. I totally agree. Before we wrap up, if there's one thing that you want the folks listening to take away from this episode, Vera, what would that be?
It would be that there is a solution. There is hope that although it sounds like what I'm saying is stop eating sugar or refined foods, and that sounds like, oh my God, how will I live? The good news is that it will feel hard at first. We call that post-acute withdrawal, pause, or just withdrawal, which includes mental craving and feeling of deprivation. But it actually goes away in 10 days, 2 weeks. It does not last a lifetime. The only reason why it lasts a lifetime for some people is because they keep cheating and igniting that dopamine spike, because dopamine is the want. And once that dopamine is settled, you start wanting the Brussels sprouts and you eat them, it's all kind of recalibrated. The good news is, once you're there over that hump, it's a great life. I like to say it's freedom tastes great.
I love that. Freedom tastes. You said something earlier too that I liked. It was hunger is the best chef. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, no, that's not mine, but that's a phrase that I like to think of a lot. Yeah.
I was gonna say you gotta trademark that if it's yours.
No, it's not mine. But freedom tastes great is mine. Let me say also about my book, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, for sure.
So if people are interested in learning more about this stuff, I have a website that's called addictionsunplugged.com. And I have a book that I wrote called Food Junkies, The Recovery from Food Addiction, that you can get on Amazon. And it talks about everything that we've talked about. Well, actually, no, Ricky, you had some good questions. But it has a lot of background that I've talked about. And also I have a Facebook group called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar-Free for Life. Please join that group.
And where can people connect with you on the socials? Are you on Instagram, Twitter, any of that?
Yes, I'm on Twitter, but really it's actually best if you just go to my website, so addictionsunplugged.com, get it there, or on my Facebook page, so Vera Tarman.
Okay, wonderful. I'm just making sure folks know, because I'm sure after this episode, people are going to reach out with questions about, maybe maybe they have a problem that they didn't realize before.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this has been a delightful conversation. I think we both learned a lot about each other. You learned that maybe I might have a moderate sugar and caffeine addiction, and
Right.
I learned that you don't like pineapple very much.
That's right. And intermittent fasting, I'm not crazy about.
But thank you so much for joining me, Vera. I really, really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thank you, Rick.
So that was my conversation with clinician, addiction specialist, and medical director, Dr. Vera Tarman. I really got a lot out of that conversation with Vera, both on sort of like a personal level and also on an intellectual level, especially the part where Vera indicated that it was possible to reprogram your brain into only craving healthy food. I thought that it would require some sort of concerted effort towards making this conscious association, like a Pavlovian response, but it seems like it's just as simple as having that cue, routine, reward, where when you have the cue for, greasy fast food, instead of having that routine of going to McDonald's and getting that sandwich, instead just picking up some anchovies or some lentils or some beans. So that was eye-opening. And then having to face some harsh truths of my own with how much sugar I take in and how much creamer I have, because as she said, even if it doesn't impair my functioning right now, it might do some damage down the line. So really the important takeaway is being aware of these behaviors and these tendencies before it escalates to the level where it might be a serious addiction. And as she indicated, addictions to food, addictions to sugar, addictions to refined and processed foods, those can be as severe as alcohol and drug addictions and cigarette addictions, even if we don't think they are. So I actually genuinely enjoyed the conversation with Vera, and I hope you guys got a lot out of it as well. Next week, I'll be talking to millionaire investor and finance author Lloyd Edge, all about passive income and financial independence. If you've ever wondered how so many people are able to quit their 9-to-5 jobs and still make money and thrive, definitely make sure to tune into my conversation with Lloyd. That's coming up next week on Nervous Habits. Thanks so much for listening, guys. This has been another episode of Nervous Habits Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at Nervous Habits Podcast, on Twitter at Nervous Habits _, on YouTube, just search Nervous Habits Podcast, and you can write to me at nervoushabitspodcast@gmail.com, nervoushabitspodcast@gmail.com. Got a lot of exciting episodes coming up, so make sure you're subscribed on Apple Podcast. If you haven't rated and reviewed the pod yet, you can do so. Would really appreciate the feedback. And remember, next time you're craving a hamburger and fries, try to reprogram your brain to pick up that can of chickpeas instead. Take care and stay nervous.